people who shout that absurd slogan have the remotest idea of what Nazism is, or have the remotest idea of what fascism is, because it is absolutely clear that people who advocate for freedom of speech are not fascists, that people who try to close down freedom of speech are the genuine fascists. And the fanatics that we see here with their latter-day swastika, and that's what that flag is, that beautiful flag which celebrated diversity has now become the swastika of the 21st century, and that is very sad. Okay, I was here to talk in the main about the lockdown and why we should have a moratorium on the lockdown. Many people feel that now that the worst aspects of the lockdown are over, we should forget about it and move on and forget about the events of the last 2 years. I beg to differ. It is essential that we hold to account those people, whether in the medical establishment, in the government, in the public administration or in the judiciary, who allowed our states and our freedoms to be so grievously attacked. We need to hold a detailed inquiry into every aspect of the lockdown. We need to do this to find out what went wrong and to ensure that the attacks against our liberties are never allowed to happen again. Who was responsible for the creation of that monster, NEFIT, which took over effective control of the government of this country for 2 years, and which is responsible for failures in healthcare, a crisis in mental health, which our next speaker will mention, and the massive expansion of our national debt? Who is responsible for the inflation which the borrowing of the last 2 years has caused? Above all, who in the medical establishment has been responsible for refusing to make proven treatments available, and who was responsible for persecuting those good, conscientious doctors who attempted to provide valid treatments for their patients? We are entitled to receive full answers to these questions, and we should hold government to account until we get them. Most importantly, we must now ask, will we ever get a proper accounting of the long-term impacts of the vaccinations? This party carried out its own research into death rates last year and found a suggested increase in mortality of 18.6% between 2021 and 2020. That is a catastrophic level of increase in mortality unprecedented in modern times. Over the last 2 years, we have witnessed a level of attack against our Constitution and against our freedom, which has been unprecedented. The principal elements of our civic society have not protected our basic rights to free assembly and association, to engage in economic activity, and to make decisions about our own health care. Those who govern us should beware. The patience of the people is not without limit. We are entitled to answers, and we will hold government to account. Have you ever felt that you're being played by a media which is committed to deceit and manipulation? Our culture appears now to have moved from one dreadful crisis, namely the COVID crisis, to another major crisis, and that is a potential world war. I condemn without hesitation the appalling actions of Russia against Ukraine, but it is clear that the leaders of the European Union seem intent on escalating that situation and grabbing control of that country for themselves, rather than doing everything possible to find a diplomatic solution, even at this late stage. It is clear to me that the elites who now control the public narrative and who control politics have placed themselves in a position, even in democracies, where they are no longer answerable to ordinary people. When we hear Mr. Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum openly boasting that he has infiltrated the cabinet governments of every European country, and that Leo Varadkar was a graduate of his World Leadership Programme, we must ask whether it is not the case that our government is answerable to the World Economic Forum, is answerable to the hysteric ideologues of Brussels, but is not answerable to the Irish people. We must make them answerable. There is a word for this type of government where there is a liaison between elected representatives Marxist parties like Sinn Féin and Fine Gael, and I always lump them together, multinational corporations and international groups. And that word is fascism. And we see a manifestation of it here today with your latter-day swastika. Increasingly we see, and I address my remarks to you, that the identity politics, whether based on race, religion, or sexual orientation or gender, is being used to divide people so that they can be exploited. And I have a question to ask you. When the communist force takes power, who do you think will be the first people to be persecuted? It will not be me. It will be you, because the history of communism has always been that as soon as they take power, the first people to be lined up against a wall and shot will be the people who helped them come to power. So you need to be very, very careful when you support counter-demonstrations like this, that you are not being used by people who will unscrupulously persecute you at the first opportunity. And that is not something that our party would ever do. We are now in a situation for the first time in 60 years, housing, that most basic requirement, has been placed outside of the access of the majority of young people. The collapse in the rates of Irish home ownership over the past 10 years have been profound. At one time in the recent past, Ireland had the highest levels of home ownership in the European Union. It is now less than the average in the EU. The reasons for that are mainly due to the impacts of government in terms of building regulation costs, unconscionable planning delays, failure to stand up to vulture funds, excessive taxation on the house buyer through VAT and development levies. We advocate for the introduction of intergenerational mortgages, a reduction and elimination of VAT on buildings for the first-time house buyer. This has been achieved in other jurisdictions, and we can achieve it here. The left will always promote public ownership of housing. We understand the importance of private home ownership to the ordinary family and the ordinary individual. You can never have a free and a prosperous democracy where ordinary people are denied the right to own and maintain property, and we will fight to ensure that that right is not destroyed. There can be no doubt that the present moment in our history is a seminal one, and that a change of times is coming. It is up to this generation to determine whether that change will be the globalist tyranny that global homo wants, or in the words of Orwell, the boot of the authoritarian government is placed into the face of ordinary people, or whether yet we can enable liberty to prevail. We have seen the events in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and United States, where countries are moving rapidly from being democratic to totalitarian states, incorporating the odious Chinese social credit system, which has the potential to manipulate and control every aspect of our lives. We have long warned that the European Union, in its opaque administrative structures, has firmly set its face against democracy and in favour of tyranny, social control, and the limiting free speech. It will be up to this generation to decide whether liberty and freedom are to be extinguished. This country has contributed more than any other to the establishment of liberty worldwide. Let us call again on that great heritage and that great tradition and stand up for liberty, stand up for freedom, and stand by the Irish Republic. Thank you very much for your attention, and I can assure you we take your comments into